So Sony is a Japanese company that has made large amounts of, like, we're talking wide variety of different electronics. It's like it's the largest in the industry. And, I mean, worldwide at least. And at the same time, despite what people will say, Sony still to this day has a revenue in 2020 of 8.3 trillion yen, or basically 8,300,000,000,000 yen. All right, so May 7th, 1946 is when Sony was originally opened. Sony to this day has roughly 110,000, so probably a little bit higher, employees that work for them over the course of their years, and they're still employed by Sony. Sony is currently located in Tokyo. Sony of Japan is where it originated from, of course, but to this day they're still doing pretty good despite what some people might say otherwise. So as of right now, Sony has at least 50% in stocks of the semi-sensor electronics motions, like sensor detectors and all that. So they're one of the semi-conductors of the world leaders when it comes to that business practice. Back in 2015, Sony basically became the fifth largest TV selling manufacturer in the world when it came to what it had. And it's because again, Sony's not just electronics as far as video games and software, but they also illustrate hardware, software. But at the same time, though, they also had like their own like TV productions, and like they try to get in like every single business they can. So back in 1946, Sony opened up with a capital of 190,000 yen, which is basically $190,000. And Japan over at the time was cheap, so they could do this. And they opened an electronics shop, believe it or not, because people in Japan were, again, like basically ahead in the way. So what was going on during World War II in Japan, it very well could have been. They were doing pretty good even before, even during the war, they were doing pretty good, even though it was stationary in Japan with what they were doing. As of right now, 1971, Sony was the very first company worldwide to issue a cassette tape that was like the first of its kind, but due to its expensive price, and at the time this was kind of expensive for what it was doing. Their brand was, kind of not as popular as some of the competitors, but it was actually really interesting what they managed to do. It was like they kind of did like the same thing, where like they made a TV and it was like a 2-in-1. You had a cassette player, cassette tape, it'd record stuff, you listen to music, do playback, rewind, kind of like a VCR to VHS before, it became what it did. So as of March 31st of this year, there were roughly 1.26 billion shares, roughly, of like what Sony was going for. Like there was a lot of people, like it's like roughly 423,000 shareholders, somewhere around there. It might be a little bit more, a little bit less, but because I'm opening and closing browsers, I'm not looking at the number offhand, so. But think of it like that, Sony is a company that's not only so well known, but it's got tons of people that have invested in its stocks over the years, and rightfully so. So Sony made the very first all transistor TV, I think it was like TV8-301 or something like that, in 1959, and Sony was the very first one to do it, and it was actually pretty successful for its time because everybody wanted one. But only so many people obviously had it. So somewhere in 2021, Sony's going to be having like a second reincarnation of it. It's going to be called Sony's testing facility or something like that. It's going to be Sony Electronics something, and it's going to be like the corporation of it. So it's going to basically be it's going to have its testing, its managing, and its researching. So that way they can do all the shipping and all that for the rest of the company as well. It's going to be like the next power source of it. So gain the power and then, produce its research and science elsewhere. Or it's going to do all that and then, send its results somewhere else. So the market value for Sony as of July 2020 was roughly over $90 billion. I think it's even higher than that now, but it's you know, it really goes to show you how much money Sony is. A lot of people say Sony's been losing money here and there, but really, if you think about it in a way, I mean, they still manage to stay afloat, especially with all the, you know, the rifts that they have, or I can't remember what it's called. It's like they have money stored away in like tariffs or tariffs or whatever the hell it's called. I'm always drawing a blank with this stuff. But they have like offshore banks. They have offshore, you know, private accounts in not just banks, but like. So it's interesting to think like how much money they really have stowed away. It's not just for like even Japan doesn't. It's it protects their money, and it's like at the same time they're not like able to invest it, but like it's there when they need it though. And like Nintendo, but technically Sony itself is actually owned by the same family, even though they've been passed on through certain people. It goes back to 1874. The guy who the family that owns Sony now, mind you, Sony again wasn't open until like 1940s, but the guy who did business with the original founder of Sony and the company that bought into the owner was the one that currently even surpassed like even Nintendo at one point. So this goes to show you that, you know, Sony's history has been sort of expanded into the point where it's been in the family of the same guy that actually owned not Nintendo, but they own like the largest news circulating publication at the time in the world. And it just goes to show you how fast this really is, because, you know, Nintendo, like for example, everybody talks about how old Nintendo was, like it circulated around like the same family, but, you know, different leaders. But the people that actually own Sony have actually been, the same family owned it for like almost 130 years, even though the company, like the business that the same family that owns it has been in business for 130 years, 150 years, so somewhere around there. And so they didn't open Sony until like 1940s, but, you know, they were still in business like even like 80 years before that. You know, it's like 80, 70 years. It's nuts, like, you know, how fast you can learn about one saga of history, and then the people that owned it had even other businesses that, you know, it's crazy. So hopefully you learned something with that. Again, yeah, things get lost in time and history, but it's, you know, time and space, you know, but you can always go back and look at it if you really invest in it enough. So, you know, hopefully you learned something. If you did, yeah, I'm glad I taught you something. But again, you know, comment, rate, subscribe, favorite, share this video. You can follow me on this channel. If there's any requests you have, let me know. You can support me on Patreon if you want. Links in the description. You don't have to, but, you know, I'm just throwing that out there. And if you want to see anything, just let me know. But more importantly, have a nice day, and I will see you in the next video.